Hey folks, I'm Tom Vasel, and in another video today, I'm reviewing Altiplano, and I recommend that you watch that so you can see how this game works. But I made this video because a lot of people, this is the direct successor to Orleans, and so a lot of people are going to wonder about, you know, how different are they? Are they the same? If you like one, will you like the other? So I'm going to attempt to give you a bit of a meager response in this video as to the differences between them. Now realize I have played the DLP version of Orleans, but I now own the deluxeified version from Tasty Minstrel Games. And there is no such thing yet for this one. In fact, there probably never will be because this is being picked up by Renegade. However, the components, I do remember seeing the components for the original Orleans. The components are pretty much the exact same thing. The bags and stuff, don't get me wrong, I really like having these deluxe. I think they blow away the components in Altiplano, but it's not really that big of a deal and doesn't really affect gameplay. Something that does affect it slightly, and I'll just tell you right now, guys, I like Orleans better than Altiplano, but there's a couple reasons for that. And the main one is that there's expansions. There's 2 expansions for Orleans, and I think the one expansion really just takes it to another level. I really like it. Well, Altiplano doesn't have those yet. Orleans also has slightly more interaction than Altiplano. Altiplano has almost none. Now, Orleans doesn't have a ton, but Orleans, for me, feels like a race a little bit more than Altiplano does. In Orleans, there are different ways you're trying to get to different people that can score you points. You're racing on different tracks. Sometimes someone will buy everything from a track that will stop you. And I'm constantly looking at everyone else. So there's that kind of what's going on all the time in Orleans. I'm watching the other players. And this one, I barely cared about what the other players were doing. Sure, they could take the last resource of a stack or something, but that didn't happen nearly as much as it did in this one. And so there was different things in Orleans where you could directly affect one another. And in fact, if you play the intrigue part of the trade and intrigue expansion, there's even going to be more interaction between the players, but I hate that, so that's not a big deal. Orleans has events in it that you have to deal with. Sometimes they're negative events, sometimes they're positive events. I don't miss not having those in Altiplano. Altiplano is just very straightforward engine building. Orleans has more going on in it. There's a little bit more. There's way more resources in Altiplano, more of different things that you can do. Orleans is kind of a more focused. Now, some of the things that I like about Orleans, I do want to mention that there is a big difference between the two in how the bag building works. So in Orleans, with the bag, you throw your discs into that bag, and then you pull the discs from that bag, and you're going to place them on your board. And when you discard stuff, you discard it directly in your bag, which means, not very likely mathematically, but you could throw a disc in your bag and hardly ever see it. Altiplano gets around that by essentially having a discard box that you're going to be throwing things into, and then you pull from that box and you put them back in your bag when it's empty. So you're going to see everything in here once. That's good, but it does mean I think I like Orleans a little bit better. While this is probably a better version of how to do it, the Orleans way feels different. It feels like a bag building game. And Orleans also has some wild discs, which are pretty neat, but there's a lot fewer. Right? So you sit there, and when I play Orleans, after playing it a couple times, I know every combination by heart. Okay, this does this does this, these 2 things go here. I mean, not all the special buildings and all, but I know how everything works. In Altiplano, there's so much more, and I'm like, oh, some of them I know. Like, I definitely know that a wood and a rock move you farther onto one thing. You know, I know those, but there's more combinations, and some of the discs in here are essentially not even useful for combinations. They're just there for points, and then you want to get them in the storehouse as quickly as you can. Both games have a way to get rid of stuff out of your deck. The base game of Orleans is super boring. Altiplano is a little bit more interesting. There's more points for it. The trade expansion makes getting things out of your deck much more interesting for these. Orleans also has a board in it. On this board, you're moving around and collecting the different resources that are worth points at the end of the game. And I like that movement, and just it gives the game a little bit more dynamic feel to it. At the same time with Orleans, you can take all the actions. Altiplano, you cannot do that. You can only take an action where your guy is. Now you can move, so it adds a little bit of movement. This game has a different movement on a different board. This one, the movement is around the little boards here, and you need to plan that well to do as many actions as you possibly can. Both of the games have technology in a sense where you're able to upgrade and get new things. In Orleans, it's going to change as time goes by. You're buying from pile 1 than pile 2. In this one, there's A, B, C, D, and they come out a little bit slower. Some of them give you extra spots to store your stuff. Some of them give you extra things that you can do and change. And I find that a little bit more, I like that a little bit better than Orleans as they're coming out. And it gives a bit of a more, I want to get there first and get that done. I need to get some money to be able to buy those. In Orleans, they were a lot easier to get. Here, they're a little bit harder, but they feel more useful. And they also correspond to different locations on the board, which means they can't always be used in any situation. But again, I feel like this game has a much cooler, I'm going to build this engine, and this engine's really neat and focuses towards it. Orleans, you're trying to do a little bit of everything and move things around. Do you need to own both of them, I guess would be the question. I think they're different enough, right? They're definitely in that same bag building genre, even though I think Orleans is a true bag building. This one's a deck builder masquerading as a bag builder. But they're both in that genre. You're both pulling them. They both have that neat thing that no other game does, where you're putting down combos of tokens to take different actions, which most of the time is just getting more tokens. But they also let you do different things, and there's a way to customize your board. Altiplano, you start off unique from the other players, which I really like. I like that much better than Orleans. And I feel like, again, it's one gives you a little bit more focus, while with Orleans, you kind of just go off the other players. So, component-wise, Orleans wins, but if you look at the base game, they're the same. The expansions, Orleans wins on that. Player interaction, Orleans wins on that one too. Speed of game, I think Orleans wins, but I haven't played this one enough. Maybe this one will speed up the more we play it. Differential between the players, Altiplano wins that one because there is, you're going to start with different people. It also means each game feels a little bit different. And I also like the mission cards too in here for that regard. So I'm keeping both. I really like this genre a lot. Okay, I like bag building. I don't think Altiplano replaces Orleans at all. I think I can play one or the other. I think it would depend on the other players. I think this one's a little easier to grok, even if it is. I think they're both the same level, but this one's a little easier to understand initially. When I teach this one to people, like, I'll move on the board and do things. I'll still probably beat a newcomer in this one. Even I don't consider myself an Orleans expert, but there's that. It also has the events. You need to prepare for events, and there's also that whole whoever's the farthest gets a point, loses a point on the different tracks, and that whole little math thing at the end of Orleans. That doesn't always make sense to people at the beginning, but they kind of ignore that. Here, Altiplano, it's much more simple, the end scoring, but the beginning is a little bit harder to get into because what am I doing? Where am I going? I don't really see a whole lot that I can do right away. So it's a slower start to this game, but I think it has a more satisfying conclusion. Orleans has a banging start, and then at the end, it just fades. The game has a good ending, but it's not as strong, I think, as Altiplano. Does that help you guys? I don't know. But I'll tell you what, I'm really glad these games exist. When Reiner Stockhausen makes another game, I'm certainly going to be interested to see what happens. Will we see expansions for this one that change things? Who knows? Either way, they're both fantastic games, and I'm glad to have them.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.